So I'm going to start sharing my slides now. And as I said, we'll be moving along at quite a pace, because I know it's a short enough session. Isn't it a funny thing with writing? And those of us who have been writing for a while. Now, to be clear, I didn't start writing till I was 40. It took me a long time to get the courage and the confidence to write. So, for some people, it comes very naturally, very early, but for many, it's something that we need to grow into. So whatever stage you're at in your writing life, whether you see yourself as a writer or you simply came along today to get some tips about writing, we're all on a journey with our writing. So as the blurb said, there are 7 key factors to building and sustaining a flourishing writing practice. And like any practice, we are looking for it to be sustainable. So whether it's, if any of you are interested in exercise and staying fit, we can't go for a run one day and then 6 months later turn up and go for a run again. That's not how our bodies are built, and that's not how our minds are built. So the 7 key factors we're going to look at are about building that habit, building that sustainable habit that leads to a really productive and happy writing practice. So the first key factor is to know what's important to you as a writer, not what's important to anybody else, not what's important to the person sitting beside you, but your sense of what's important for you to write about and the type of writer that you want to be. And for many of us, we can be focused on what we think other people think is important about writing and less about what's important for us. So that's the first key factor. The second is, this is a tough one. And I know writers who have many novels and many collections of poetry, and they're still struggling to value their own work. So valuing our own work, not waiting for others to tell us whether it's good or not. That's a hugely important factor in keeping a writing practice going, even when the going gets tough. Truly valuing our own work, saying what I write about is important, and I'm getting better all the time. I may not be a perfect writer, but I am working at my craft and I'm getting better all the time, and I put a value on my own work. The third is designing a tailored writing practice that suits us. So we'll go into that in greater detail, but as a coach, and I work a lot with groups, and I also work a lot with individuals, and people often say, I've read a book by Stephen King that talks about how to have a writing practice, or I've read a book by Natalie Goldberg, who should I follow? And I always say, it's about just, again, what's important to you and what kind of writing practice is going to work with you and your life and your personality and the kind of person that you are, and then commit to that. And the fourth is building resilience, being able to get back up again when things get tough. So in the last few days, I've had two rejections and one maybe. How do when you open that email and you get a rejection, how do you handle that? Building resilience. How do we keep ourselves motivated? That energy. Writing, any creative practice takes a certain amount of energy. How do we keep ourselves motivated? How do we make sure that we're rewarding ourselves for the work that we're doing? And staying accountable to ourselves, to the work that we're doing, and yet to our goals as writers. And whether that's in the context of the university course that you're doing, or it could be a wider context of perhaps a desire to be a creative writer, to write beyond the academic world. And then lastly, and this is so important, is how do we find the right supports for us? in that although writing is a solitary activity mostly, how do we, when we come back out of actually writing, how do we find ways to be supported in our writing, both in terms of the craft, but also that piece around motivation, that piece around companionship as writers. If there's anybody has any questions at this stage, please pop them into the chat. Otherwise, I'll keep going. And just check in. Am I talking too fast?
No, I think this is fine.
Is that okay? Yeah, because we Dublin people often talk very fast. So do let me know if I speed up. This cartoon character, he's a guy called Snoopy. Many of you may be familiar with him. It's an American cartoonist who was writing from the 1950s. And he was a character my late mother loved, Snoopy. But I love him because he is a writer. Not quite sure how talented he is, but he has huge admiration and confidence in himself as a writer. So we have a lot to learn from Snoopy. So writer, know thyself is our first, and there's good old Snoopy. I'm a great admirer of my own writing, and how many of us can say that? And thank you very much. We're going at an understandable speed. That's super. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Because this is I'm a coach. We coaches are obsessed with questions. So give yourself just a moment to think about, when did you begin writing? Just a moment to think about your own writing journey. When did you begin writing? And that second question, what does it feel like when the words are flowing? So because you'll have these slides afterwards, don't worry about necessarily answering the questions now, but it can be a really good idea when we're thinking about what's important to us as writers, to spend a little time thinking about our own story, about when did we begin writing? What does it feel like when the words flow? Just getting into that space, out of our heads, and often kind of into an embodied memory of writing. Every great writer, in fact, every writer is a reader first. So just thinking about who or what is your biggest inspiration, and what are the qualities you admire in this writer or their writing. And the third one, what is the most important lesson you've learned from this writer or writing? So when we are looking to explore what's important to us as writers, it can be very useful to think about the writers that we admire and the writing that we admire, and what are those qualities, because it's very likely that they're going to tell us something very important about the kind of writer that we want to be as well. And if anybody would like to share, perhaps who might be their biggest inspiration or what those qualities might be. I know when I ask these questions, often people talk about it can be the honesty of somebody's writing. It can be how accessible their writing is. It can be how beautifully they use language. It may be how entertaining their writing is, how challenging their writing is. So just think about those qualities that you admire in writers or writing. And what is it telling you about your own writing? Oh, I love this. I like P.G. Wodehouse for the way he makes you look at ordinary things in an utterly different way. Yeah, that's so true. And that's I'm smiling because P.G. Wodehouse is an old, a bit like Snoopy. Wasn't born yesterday, but even today, that's that wonderful sense of making the ordinary thing, look at the ordinary things in an utterly different way. That's wonderful. Yeah. When we're thinking about what's important to us as writers, remembering that writing is always about relationship. It's always about our relationship with ourselves, the writer, our relationship with the writing, the language, and then through that, our relationship with the reader. And often in the kind of the lonely activity of writing, we forget that there's someone out there in the world whose life is going to be made better by the writing that we've done. And think about it yourself as a reader. Think about that relationship you have with particular books and particular writers, and recognizing that there's a wonderful dialogue going on. There's a wonderful conversation. So, valuing the work. How do we get to value our work? And here's a classic Snoopy. Look what he says. He says, "Gentlemen, I have just completed my new novel. It is so good, I am not even going to send it to you. Why don't you just come and get it?" Could you imagine? Could you imagine having that confidence? Not easy, but there you go. I love that. Brilliant. So back to the questions. Just ask yourself this question: what value in time and energy and attention am I willing to invest in my writing? Just give that a moment to think about that. We so crave others' attention. We so crave others telling us that our work is valuable. We often forget to ask ourselves that question about what am I willing to invest in my writing, in terms of the time I give it, in terms of the energy that I give it, and that attention, and I'm going to use the word loving attention, because writing is about a relationship with the deepest sense of who we are as people. I mean, regardless of what we're writing, when we are in our flow and the words are coming out, we often discover things about ourselves that we didn't know beforehand. So there's an extraordinary relationship going on with ourselves when we're writing. And so what value am I willing to invest in that relationship in my writing? And sitting with the question, what would be different if I really valued my writing? What would change? Would I behave differently? Would I have a different energy about my writing? Would it change how confidently I spoke about it? I'm just looking at what Sal said. If I could, I would like to give everything I can after what I give to my family and friends. Well, there's the challenge, isn't it? Is where does our writing practice fit in relation to the other roles and responsibilities that we have? And I would say that the magic word no is a really important part of anybody's writing practice. In order to say yes to my writing, I need to say no to other things. And that's not to say that we don't fulfill our other roles, important roles in our life. But I can certainly speak for myself, and I've no doubt I can speak for many of you here in the room. We often spend more time than is necessary on other parts, on other roles that perhaps aren't as important as giving some time over to our own writing life. Now, I am flying along here, and I'm very aware of that, so I'm just going to take a second. Actually, I'm just going to stop for a moment. Anything else that anybody wants to say so far? Any observations or comments? Or great, yeah, I'm totally supportive. Super, great to hear that. But I'm radically arguing that even if they're not super supportive, sometimes it's important to say no. Oh, I love that. Okay, great question coming in here. What about the belief in the importance of writing in the current world? That's a really interesting question. And I would love actually for you to say more about that. What is your belief about the belief in the importance of writing in the current world?
If I may, it seems to me that it takes a lot to write. You dig deep into your heart, and there's a lot of investment, of course, of your energy and efforts. But especially for literary pieces, it seems that the impact in the world. When I was younger, it seemed I was writing to change the world, but now it seems that nothing changes. So I'm just wondering if it's worth it.
That's a really honest kind of statement to make. And from what you've said is that your own belief in how writing can change the world has changed because of your experience over many years. And the truth is that if we're looking to the world for validation, or if we're looking for evidence that our writing can change the world, we may not find it. And it takes great courage and self-belief to say, I believe that what I'm writing is of value and important. And as writers, we can never truly understand the impact of our writing. I mean, sometimes we'll get feedback, won't we? But many times the people who read our work, we never meet them. We never get the chance to get feedback. So I think for me, there's a leap of faith in believing that out there are people whose lives are better because of the words I write, in the same way that my life is better because of the words that I read.
May I share some numbers for you, if you don't mind? I'll take a minute.
Yeah. In relation to what?
To reading, the other side of writing. Okay, I mean, I got some statistics which I found very horrifying, because when I write, many times I've had this. I used to be a journalist earlier, and a lot of people used to tell me, Chandu, I saw your article. So I said, yes, but have you read it? Okay, so and I found that most often they haven't read the article. Okay, so 33. This is from the US. 33% of high school graduates never read another book the rest of their lives. 42% of college graduates never read another book after college. 57% of new books are not read to completion. 70% of US adults have not been in a bookstore the last 5 years, and 80% of 80% of US families did not buy or read a book the last year.
Yeah. So absolutely kind of startling statistics. And if we're thinking about keeping that motivation up for ourselves as writers, what is our response to that? And my response is actually from the world of kind of marketing and brand as well, which is sometimes we focus on the market or the readers or the audience out there. And I think that can be very disheartening, because as those statistics have shown, it can be easy to say, well, nobody's reading at the moment. Less people are going to read my work. It's about focusing and saying, if possible, to say, if my work touches a very small amount of people, that is a miracle in itself. It really is, isn't it? Now, what you wrote and invested in and put down on the page, if one other human being in the world responds to it and their life is better, and this is my belief, then you're doing a really good job. We can't control those world, what's happening, those world trends. I mean, there are other trends. If you're talking about statistics, there are more people reading and buying poetry in the UK than there was a few years ago. There's a huge upsurge in the world of poetry. So there's also swings and roundabouts as well. So there is something around kind of trying to take heart, and then you write because you can't not write. I love it. Couldn't say better than that. Perfect, wonderful. So I'll pop back to the slides, but I really appreciate your comments. Super. So just reminding ourselves in our writing practice that writing or any creative practice has a trajectory. It has, when we're on a project, there's that research preparation stage, and there's that divergent thinking that needs to go into looking at things in new and different ways. And we also have to give ourselves time in that process to step back from the work and that moment of illumination. And for a lot of people, they think, I was working so hard on my writing for several days, and then I was really getting stuck with a character, and I couldn't work it out. And then I went for a walk, or I had a shower, and I had that aha moment, or I had a good night's sleep, and I woke up and I discovered the solution to a problem that I had with a particular part of the plot. So just reminding ourselves that any true creative practice is going to have moments of intense activity And it's also going to have moments of stepping back and giving ourselves time to recover and recuperate, and giving ourselves some breathing space. Creativity is an energy like any other, and it needs to be replenished as well. So just reminding ourselves of that. So our writing schedule should depend on what our writing goals are. So, for example, if our writing goal is, I would like to write a novel within 6 months, well, then our writing schedule is going to be, by necessity, I'm probably going to have to write maybe 5 out of 7 days a week. Where if our writing goal is, I would love to have a few poems written by the end of the year, well, then your writing schedule may be very different. You can perhaps spend an hour or 2 a week on writing. So it really depends on our writing goal, what writing project we're currently working on, and what stage we're at in that project. So, there may be points, and particularly in a university setting or a college setting, where you have deadlines that are that you can't negotiate. So then your writing schedule may have to be, by necessity, quite disciplined and regular. But if you're writing for your own pleasure, or you're writing beyond a particular curriculum or course, then it's very much about designing your own schedule. And just to say too, is that really being cognizant of the fact that we have other time, energies, and commitments. There can be family, there can be work, there can be so many different things that are pulling from us. And acknowledging that we're limited in our energy. So that's where the magic word no comes in. So our writing schedule needs to be realistic. Sometimes people say, oh, I'm going to write 7 days a week for 2 hours every morning. And I check in with them and say, is that realistic? Is that going to happen for you every day? And they'd say, oh, well, maybe not. So what a realistic may be, 3 mornings a week, I will get up and write for an hour and a half or 2 hours. So just what is realistic for you at your particular stage in your project, given your other time commitments. And then sustainable. You're looking for something that you can do over a period of time. And then flexible. And Margaret Atwood has a great quote. She says, expect to be interrupted. There's always interruptions. We get sick, someone else gets sick, other college work has to take precedence because we've got a deadline. So allowing ourselves that flexibility within our schedule. But it has to be planned. We have to be able to look ahead to the week, look ahead to the month, and have a clear idea of what that our writing practice is going to look like. I would advise you to have it visible, to have, whether it's on a calendar or whether you have it on something on your laptop, but that you can visibly see what your writing schedule looks like. And then it has to be measurable, that you're able to say to yourself, I know my writing schedule is successful because at the end of the week, this has happened or that has happened, or the other could be, I wrote 500 words a day. Whatever it is, so you're clear about your own measurements of success. A measurement could be, if I feel positive and confident about my writing at the end of the week, that's a great measurement of success. That I have valued my own work, that's a great measurement of success. So back to the questions. Think about this now. When is your best time to write? Are you a morning or are you an evening person? Or maybe you're a mix, you're somebody around lunchtime. Follow your energy. I happen to be I'm much more of a morning person. What about yourselves? Are you morning people? Isn't it good to know your own? Is it circadian rhythm? Is what it's called? Your own body clock. When is the best time for you to write? And for some, for example, if I'm doing new writing, morning I have to do it, but I can happily edit in the evening or the afternoon. So depending on the kind of writing that you're doing, if you're at the beginning of a project, oh, look at this, late night to dawn, oh my goodness, my brain would be crying if that was me. Whenever I have the time, inspiration strikes. However, I often jot down points and ideas throughout the day, which is great. So you have that, that kind of basis to come back to. Super. And jot, oh no, I of course, that we understood that. Super. So yeah, you can see, can't you, that the importance of being able to tap into your own schedule, your own rhythm. Now, just a moment. My apologies. So there we go. And in terms of the slides that you missed, and you'll see them again, but we were just talking about that realistic, sustainable, flexible. There were just single words on the slides. Now, how much writing or writing-related activities constitutes a successful day or week or month's writing for you? So what do I mean by writing-related activities? Sometimes we are literally writing, but can anybody pop into the chat? What other activities can we do that will nourish our writing, will help us to turn up at the page fresh, that will give us what we need? Let me see. The deadline is a great motivator. Yeah, and for some people it's a great motivator, and for others it can actually kind of almost give them a block. I listen to a lot of poetry, and that's so that lovely sense of nourishing your brain away, and research notes, essays, even thinking and visualizing with eyes closed. Daydreaming, 100%. Daydreaming has been proven to be just phenomenal in terms of what's the word I'm looking for, I suppose, but not just generating activity, but really kind of allowing us to see things in very different ways. Walking, very much so, that rhythm, and the nap, and the nap is great as well. So all of those, how I think about it is ask, are these activities bringing me back to the page, excited and motivated? And if they are, then they are fantastic activities. Editing works of others on mine, brilliant. So, for example, it's unlikely that scrolling through social media feeds is going to help our writing, because it typically ends up pulling us into a vortex of information. It also can pull us into a vortex of fear of missing out, and then just a cacophony, isn't there, of voices and a lot of polarized thinking, and so that sense is, I'm not saying that 15 minutes on social media isn't great as a reward, but if you find yourself getting sucked into social media, ask yourself the question: is it likely to bring me closer to my work, or is it pulling me away from my work? And that's the answer. So I think just bearing myself in different forms of literature, and the world that I'm building, and people watching too, anything that you do that you come away feeling more energized and alive and in touch with the world. Observation of subtle things, according to me. Oh, I love that. So that attention to detail, that slowing down and noticing things, all of those can help to bring us back to the page. Wonderful. So when we are starting out and we're developing a writing practice, the first stage of it is setting ourselves up. So this is I don't know whether any of you, I'm sure you haven't, this is a Francis Bacon studio. And actually it used to be in England. And then when he died, it was moved piece by piece over to Dublin, and it's now in a gallery called the Hugh Lane Gallery. And I just love it. You can see into this room, and to me it looks like absolute chaos. And yet for Francis Bacon, this is what he needed in order to get into his creative zone. And I'm sure he knew exactly where everything was in the room. So setting ourselves up is about, again, what's right for us. So here's, again, our questions. What needs to happen first before you can settle down to writing? So, and the second question to go with it is, do you have a ritual, a special place, a pre-writing activity that helps you to settle in? So apparently from our brain's point of view, we often need a little hit of dopamine if we are reluctant to start writing. So how do we get a little hit? It might be give ourselves a cup of our favorite drink, go for that little walk, listen to some music that we love. So allowing our brains to get that lovely little rush of a dopamine hit. It might be that I need, somebody might say, I really need to clear the table before I can start writing. For some people, there's no space. For many of us, there's no space allocated in our house for our writing. So it might be I need to clear away some things first before I can start writing. For others, it might be, I know somebody who likes to light a little candle before they start. Somebody else had mentioned that, I think for Roald Dahl, the writer, he used to go down, he had a little shed down the end of the garden, but he used to pare his pencils before he started. That was his ritual. And somebody told me there recently that they had no space in their home, but they found a corner and they put a little gate up on the corner and there was a small chair and a small table, and then they'd have to open the little door, the little gate, and close it behind them. So they were creating that sense of, I'm moving from my other activities into this. So I'd love to know if any of you have any little rituals. A pint of Guinness. Well, what can I say? Only a pint of Guinness. One maybe might be brilliant, but maybe 10 pints mightn't be quite the thing. I love it. So anybody think, is there anything that you need to do? Do you need to clear your table, or just maybe not? Do you need to go somewhere? For some people, writing in the house works for them, but for others, maybe going to a cafe where there's lots of noise. Some people love lots of noise when they're writing. Or is the library a great place for you to go? Is there somewhere in the college campus that might help you to find your to drop into your writing? And that's reading the writing done the previous day. That is such a good a good idea. And I know somebody who used to would finish in the middle of a sentence, or just towards the end of the sentence. So when they came back to it, they could start kind of run straight into their writing. So they're great examples. So then, how do we stay in our flow? Oh, before we do, some comments come in. Oh, I love this. I find the practice, 1 second. Oh, lovely. I find the practice of get it done first, then get it right. I love it. Aim low, and then you can go back in and change things around. Clear the table, bed, sofa, sink, sit down, read what you've written and continue. I love it. And I listen to sounds, not songs, that remind me of the work that I'm doing. That's wonderful. So it sounds like, for many people, it comes very naturally to find that ritual, that way of easing ourselves into the writing. Love it. So when we are writing, how do we stay in the flow? So again, just reminding ourselves of in the flow is, what can help me to keep in the flow? Are you somebody that needs regular breaks? Do you need little sugar hits? Do you need movement? Or are you somebody that it's much better for you to just keep writing? So just check in with yourself and say, what is that routine going to be for me? I know for me at the moment, my writing schedule is a half an hour a day of journaling, and then Friday I have the privilege at the moment of not having to work on a Friday, and so Friday morning is my writing time. So it just depends on. I know if we'd been having this conversation 10 years ago, that wouldn't have been possible. Reading it aloud when I'm stuck somewhere, yeah, I love it. I need library or a clean table or a bed. So that, yeah, and for some people that neat and tidy, that visual, and for others it makes no difference. So depending on what's important for you. And then think, are you somebody that needs strict routine or somebody that thrives on flexibility? So if you're somebody that really likes strict routine, then your writing schedule is likely to be on this day and this day and this day at this time is when I write. Where somebody else might be, I'm committed to writing for 6 hours a week, but each week that might be at different times and places. So depending on what you need yourself. I can only write with a prompt, and that's great. So great to know that. Now, good question. Should a writer feel guilty of not following a routine? Never. If a routine is, first of all, we can define a routine. It's still a routine if you say for 6 hours a week or 4 hours a week, I'm going to write. But the time and the place, I'll decide. If you're the type of personality that needs flexibility, that's a routine in itself. I would say there's no place for guilt in our writing life, because guilt is one of those emotions that really isn't of much use to us. Or if we are feeling a bit guilty, what can we? Is there some action that we can take? And if there is, great, take that action. And if there's not, if we're feeling guilty about something we have no control over, I say, let it go. Let it go. There really is no place. There's enough in the rest of our life. So advice, expect to be interrupted. And then ending a session. Thinking about just how do I measure the success of each session? In other words, when you think of it, do I measure it on how many words I've written? Do I measure it on how long I've stayed at the desk? Do I measure it on how I felt at the beginning of the session and how I feel at the end of the session? Do I measure it on the quality of the work that I have produced? Do I measure the success on if I set out with a goal and I reach the goal, then the session is a success. And then what admin at the end of the session can help you to settle into the next session. Sorry, does somebody have a question? Yeah. So for some it might be finishing in the middle of a sentence so that you can come back in. It might be about making sure that everything is in the right folders or files on your laptop. It might be about setting things up so that it's very easy for you to settle into the next session. And then I find this really good is if then, which is a plan B. So example, if I miss my writing practice on Monday morning, then I'll extend Tuesday's session. So giving ourselves that freedom to say, here's my writing schedule for the week, but if I miss something, then I have my plan B. And the advantage to this is that you don't have to renegotiate with yourself every time. It's written into your schedule that if I miss a practice, then I'll find another place for it. So it's not about saying, oh God, I've missed my practice. Oh, it's my routine isn't working, and then we feel guilty, and before we know it, we're beating ourselves up and we're avoiding the writing. So just reviewing our schedule, I would recommend that when you are building up a writing practice, that you check in maybe every month and just see how you're doing, or could even be once a week and see how do I know my schedule is working? How do I am I happy with how things are going? And remember, and this is a great analogy, apparently a plane is only on course for a very limited amount of time, maybe 5% of the time. And for the rest of the time, it's self-correcting, it's getting back on course. And if we think about that for our writing practice, we don't have to be getting it right all the time. Our job is to be moving to getting it right all the time. And we'll get to where we need to go if we do that, because there's no guilt involved in that. It's very realistic. I'm going to be interrupted. There's going to be weeks where I'm tired, but I'm keep getting myself back on course. Now, how are we doing for time? Okay, so building resilience. Sorry, do any questions? Anything before I move on?
This is Chandu here.
Yes.
Culturally, I find a difference between those people in the West, typically people like you, and folks like us who are in the East, because I worked in the knowledge business, and I find a lot of people in the West culturally, they are used to documenting, and they're used to having, far more discipline from my understanding. Whereas a lot of us are so used to an oral tradition that we are not very good at actually documenting and checking back at how we do a lot of things. So I just want you to, whether you have any observations on the same, or whether the others in the group feel the same way.
Let's just throw it open to the group first.
I don't know. I'm personally not very sure that that's how the division works, this oral thing. I don't think today in this contemporary world that we sort of work in that sense out here. I don't know if there is that kind of a sharp distinction between modes of working anymore, as perhaps was the case some time back.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Mhm. I mean, I absolutely take your point that, there are cultures of approaching writing. But, what I'm always interested in too is that, and particularly as a woman, is that, for many, many years, most of the examples that we got of writing practices came from men's writing practices. And in many cases, those practices, they were able to focus on their writing and not the other jobs that needed to be done. In fact, it wasn't not just even men, but men who had the leisure of writing, having writing practices that they didn't need. So my sense is that, and there's a great question here about the difference in professionalism. Again, as writers and valuing our own work, what does being professional about my writing look like to me? And I think that's an individual thing in that. And that question I said, if you really valued your work, what would that look like? What would be different? What behaviors would you have? There's one thing for sure. If we do act professionally, and when I say professionally, I mean where we respect deadlines, where we turn up regularly and do the work, where if we say we'll do something, we will. And if there's a problem, we'll communicate that early and we can work on it. I think if we behave like that in the world as writers, others are more likely to take our writing seriously and us seriously as a writer. That would be my sense of it. I hope that's useful. So just resilience, and this is a classic Snoopy here. Gentlemen, regarding the recent rejection slip you sent me, I think there might have been a misunderstanding. What I really wanted was for you to publish my story and send me $50,000. Didn't you realize that? So, if we could all just deal with rejection this way. So here's the unavoidable truth. When it comes to creative writing, all creativity, creative thinking, creative practice, creativity equals risk, and with risk comes vulnerability. In order for us to write our truth, and whether we write that truth through fiction or whether we write that truth through memoir or etc., is we can't by necessity know that it's going to be a great result at the end. We can't know that, and that's the wonder of creativity. So there's always risk in creativity, and with risk comes vulnerability. So when we think about resilience, what is resilience? The capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. It's having the courage to stay with those vulnerable feelings. And Brené Brown, a wonderful American researcher and storyteller, her wonderful definition is resilience is a tolerance for discomfort. And I just think it's quite brilliant. When things aren't working out with our writing, it's not easy to sit with that feeling. If our work is rejected, it's not easy to sit with that feeling. If we get stuck, it's not easy to stick with that feeling. If we get criticized, it's not easy to sit with that feeling. And yet, if we can sit with the feeling, acknowledge it, and then move beyond it, we can build a sustainable writing practice and a love of our own writing that will keep us going. So how do we build resilience? Build into your practice measurements of success that do not depend on anybody's say-so but your own. What if a measurement of your success was, I know I'm successful at writing when I am working on my craft and I am giving the time and attention my work deserves. That could be your measurement of success. Not somebody else's, regardless of whether you get published or not. and accept setbacks as a normal occurrence in every writing project. It's part of the creative process. Setbacks, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to, rewrite three chapters. You've got to get rid of a few characters. I know myself from writing collections, and those of you who are poets will know this. The first draft, I might take 25 poems out of that and write another 30. There's a real sense of the final draft. If I look back at that first draft, I have to accept that there are many different setbacks in the process. And then allow ourselves a wallow. If we've had a setback, allow ourselves to feel sorry for ourselves and give ourselves a bit of tender, loving care, and then reframe the rejections as a necessary step in the right direction. So it's not about denying the fact that it's not easy to be when things are tough, but that we keep moving through it. And then this is so important. Celebrate the victories, however small. They sustain us when the going gets tough. So allowing ourselves those, even if they're very small, I got somebody told me they really liked that paragraph. Somebody, my mother told me that she liked the poem. Little victories, however small. The first time perhaps you get published, and it's a small, it feels like a small thing. Make sure that you celebrate it. And just a word about the inner critic. The inner critic is something that so many of us, whether we call it the inner judge or the inner critic, but it's that voice that we hear in our heads that is often, it can often be quite a harsh voice, or it could be kind of a needling voice that is very critical of what we're doing. But just a reminder, and we can't go into it here, but there's a whole I suppose the kind of psychology behind it is that voice is, their job is to protect us, to try and protect us from going out there into the world and experiencing feelings that the inner critic, that little voice, isn't sure we can handle. So our inner critic, the inner judge, has been with us since we were very small. It's a very young part of the psyche. And their job is to try and protect us from feelings of shame, from feelings of vulnerability, of maybe feelings of not belonging, of feelings of those deep feelings of not being understood. And so if we can discover what they're trying to protect us from, we can begin to have a conversation with that inner critic. And it can go something like, I appreciate you're trying to protect me, but I have it. I'm going to continue writing, and it's going to be okay. And will you succeed? Yes, you will indeed. And this is for the mathematical people in the room, 98.75% guaranteed. That's a mathematical fact. Very quickly, staying motivated, just what needs to be in place for you to stay motivated and committed to your writing. And if you have a big end goal at the end, it's really great to break it down into smaller little chunks or steps. And if you feel stuck, set some wildly unambitious goals and keep reaching them. I'll write one sentence today. I'll read back over one paragraph that I wrote. Feel stuck, set some small little unambitious goals. I will turn up to my writing once this week. My head, I just can't write this week. Then I will do some reading to support my writing. So if you're feeling stuck, wildly unambitious goals, and keep reaching them. And the more you reach them, then those goals can get bigger and bigger. And what if we reward effort rather than the end result? What if we're kind to ourselves and say, you're really trying your best, and reward ourselves? Because our brains are very linear. We're either moving towards a reward, or we're moving away from a threat. So if we're beating ourselves up, if we're feeling guilty about not writing enough, we're actually going to be moving away from our writing. Where if we can give ourselves small rewards, it might be a cup of tea, it might be some nice chocolate, ice cream, or it could just go for a walk or whatever. And what if we reframed mistakes and failures as necessary steps along the way to being a better writer? So that reframing, there's no such thing as a mistake that can't be learned from, and failure is just one of those words that it's only a failure if we fail to move on from it or make sense of it. Now, take it now. Oh, wonderful! Look at these. Much of this applies to my mathematics and computer science writing work. The same sense of despair, joy. Yeah. I had to leave. Okay, to jump on my shuttle. Super, no problem. Your ice cream is your choice. I love it. Now we're very close to the end, and sharing our goals with someone we can trust can also help keeping us motivated. So making them public in a contained way can help us. Now, I'm not talking about doing it in a way that makes us feel under pressure, but it can be useful maybe to be in a writing group or where we can share our goals, etc. And then plotting or recording our progress visually can be really useful. This can be simply recording your daily or weekly word count, or adding up the hours you spent in all your writing related activities. And Toggle, that's just a free time tracker that can be very useful to use if you wanted to. And lastly, just accountability is the ability to own or claim our actions and explain the reasons behind them. So just that piece about staying accountable to ourselves and reminding ourselves of the big picture, your writing goals, the intrinsic pleasure of writing, your ideal reader, the value that you're putting on your own writing, your belief in the goodness of writing and the power of it. And just if you are wondering about, is this activity going to help me come back to my writing? Take an example of that activity and just ask yourself, is it moving me further closer to my goal or moving me further away from it? And this is the last, just finding the right support. So again, we have a classic Snoopy, dear sweetheart, he says, I miss you morning, noon and night. And then Lucy says, Lucy's another character, she says, that's too vague. When you write to a girl, you have to be more specific. And so he says, I miss you at 8:15, 11:45 and 9:36. Good old Snoopy. So be clear what you need from any support. And at different stages in your writing project, you may need different supports. So at the beginning, it may not be useful to have other eyes on your writing as you're beginning to find your voice. And then as you get a little bit more confident, perhaps asking others to give you feedback or critique. So just being clear about the kind of support. And I would say for many of us, and Srilatha and I have had the privilege of being in a group that's hugely supportive, having one or two close writer friends that can help to encourage us and keep us accountable. It's one of the most satisfying and reliable ways of getting support. So I really would encourage you to find a writing buddy or a small group of other writers who you can get support from. And here's my mantra for surviving. Stay close to the words as much as you can. Stay as close to your own words as much as you can. When things are going to aim low, somebody else had already put it into the chat, isn't it? Don't worry about the quality. Get the words down. You can come back and you can craft it. Aim low. And the third mantra I have is nothing is wasted in our writing. Every life experience we have, every setback, everything we can recycle and use in our writing. Every word we write has a use, and that it's bringing us closer to the finished writing that we want to do. And that's it. Folks, I'm going to stop sharing. We have 1 minute left. Does anybody, any questions before we wrap up? And thank you so much for listening.
So my question is a very basic question. As I'm going to, I want to start writing. So what should I do most? I should read or write?
Both.
Both. Equally.
Both. Okay. I would say at the beginning of your, spend more time on your own words, but no pressure to produce something great. I would say if you're beginning writing, begin with free writing, 15 minutes a day, just writing off the top of your head, just flow of consciousness writing. And get into the habit of writing regularly, and then look, think about the kind of reading that interests you, and not the kind of reading you think you should be doing, or the reading that might impress other people. Think about the type of books and articles or whatever that interest you, and then read those. And just look at that writing and see, what is it? What are the qualities I enjoy about it? What is it teaching me about the kind of writing that I want to do? And take your time, slowly but surely. You have a whole lifetime to explore your writing. So I will be emailing I'll email a PDF of the slides. That's no problem. So I'll email that to, or I'll send you a Google link to it, because it might be too big to put into an email, and it'll be available. I know you'll probably be up. And can I mention, let's find that they're not questions, they're admin questions. I hope I answered your question. I didn't mean that in any kind of flippant way, but there is that the two, reading and writing, are really important, but your own writing, building up slowly this relationship with your own writing and your own sense of your own voice, that is where your main commitment should be. There's just one question. Somebody has wanted to ask a question.
Yes.
I'm happy to stay behind for a minute or two if they'd like to ask it.
Yes. Sure. Yeah. And if people want to stay back, and if Anne is free, you can do that.
I'm free for another 10 minutes. So I'm happy to stay for 10 minutes. Yeah.
Those of you who have to leave, you could.
Of course, absolutely. Thank you so much for your attention. It's been a pleasure.
Anuruddha here. Am I audible?
Yes.
Good morning or evening, whatever the time zone is. I'm not really well versed with that right now. I just had a very personal question in terms of my own writing practices. As someone who writes from a position of personal grief, I end up taking 2-3 nights to finish out one single piece. And along the way, I've realized over the years that how I frame a phrase today in my essay is going to take on a different shape tomorrow, in an ongoing effort to acclimatize myself to the happenings of the day. So what ultimately turns out is that the original vision that I started off with for the piece has now transformed into something that's still genuine, but it's not completely faithful to the idea that I started off with. So over the years, I realized that I end up not finishing pieces because of this. Say I end up finishing one piece out of 3 or 4. And I feel this is not a very healthy practice to have. Do you have any comments or maybe tips to kind of go over and get over this feeling in the long run?
So thank you for that question. I want to make sure that I heard it properly. So as you said, because much of your writing is based on experiences of grief, that it can take a period of a few days to for the writing to emerge, and that what you end up with is different to what you thought you were starting out with.
Yes.
And then you end up not finishing it, or thinking that it's not. So if that's did I get it right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So it could be very interesting for you to just to think about this, is that what are you being true to? So one of the extraordinary things about writing is that it can move us from where we are, where we think we are, to another place. So that your writing from a place of grief is transforming your relationship with those experiences and events that you had. It's not about being true to the minute detail, or it's about the emotional truth. So the question perhaps to ask yourself is, am I staying true to the emotional truth of what I'm writing, and allowing myself and my writing to be transformed through that process? And if the answer is yes, then what you're coming out with after those few days is exactly where you're meant to be. Not perhaps being, staying loyal to that place that you were when you started. And I hope I'm making sense on that, but it's about trusting yourself, trusting the writing, and being very kind and compassionate to yourself, because writing can be very cathartic, particularly when we're dealing with issues of grief or trauma. But equally, it's about being very careful with ourselves as well. But I would say it's about being true to the emotional truth of what you're writing, and being less concerned about facts or information or what you started out with. So trusting where you land is where you're meant to land, and then work with that, craft that, and there's your writing.
Right. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Adds more insight to what I've been thinking. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for walking us through what works as a sustainable writing practice. Actually, I think there are lessons in this for all of us, people committed to doing all kinds of creative work, research, and so on. So really grateful. So on behalf of the Center for Creative Writing and Translation, Sai University, and CMI, many thanks. Thanks also to the participants.